Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Book and Now. I am your humble host, Q, and I want to thank you all again for joining me on this continued journey of empathy, growth, and understanding. We have a very special show today, and I'm going to jump right into it. My guest today is a storied saxophonist, musician, teacher, leader, and legend in the jazz music industry. Now, if you are familiar with the jazz music scene, then this gentleman should need no introduction. If you are a student in the DC area studying music, then this gentleman should need no introduction. And if he does, you'll learn something here today. See, he has two distinct career paths that we're going to talk about. The first being again, storied and accomplished musician, composer, arranger, producer, writer, right? And then another career where he's a dedicated educator, serving as the director of jazz music studies at the Duke Ellington School of the Arts for over 30 years, and the founder and director of the Washington Jazz Arts Institute, and in 2018 was inducted into the Washington, D.C. Hall of Fame. Joining us here today, we have Davey Yarborough. Thank you for joining us today.
For having me.
And that was quite a laundry list of things I had to list there.
Yeah,
okay. And there are more that I decided to exclude because, frankly, I want to get to it. Right?
Okay, works for me.
So I do want to start with your background. That's where we typically like to start, is your background. What got you into music?
Well, I'm a native Washingtonian, and in elementary school in D.C., we used to be taken on field trips to Constitution Hall to see to see and hear the National Symphony rehearse. And I got a chance to hear a lot, but one of the things that stuck was the Benjamin Britten musical guide to listening.
Okay.
And I got to recognize the various instruments, and I think that was the first time that I paid any attention to anything other than the drums and the bass and whatever.
The noisier.
And then, of course, the music that they performed, they played various styles.
Okay.
And then I could hear the full orchestra, and so that's where I got the bug. And during the summers, two things. One, when I got home after that, I had we had a record player.
Okay.
And my parents had just bought a new, what was called a console at that time.
Okay.
And a combination, because it had the turntable and the radio and the speakers all in one big case. This was Grundig.
That was modern at the time, right?
Yeah, that was modern at the time. And they would tell me, don't touch the stereo until we get home, and we'll turn it on for you, and we'll turn it off.
Right.
And of course, I had a babysitter. Babysitter would disappear for a minute. I'd go down and turn it on,
see what's going on.
Put the records on. I figured it out. Only thing I didn't figure out was how to turn it off. I thought I turned it off.
Right.
But when you turn the power off, the turntables continued to work, and you had to go specifically turn that off, and I didn't know that.
Interesting.
So of course, parents came home. You been in stereo? No, not me. Well, why is the turntable turning?
Right.
Of course. Got in a little trouble with them, and during the summer, I would go. My parents are from the Carolinas, Lewisburg, as a matter of fact. My aunt was a teenager, or just headed to college.
Okay.
And she had one of those box turntables, and her record collection in her room. And when she would go to school, I'd go in sneak in there, and she'd come back. She said, "Oh, you playing my records? You're gonna mess my records up." And of course, she said, "Well, look, I'm going to give you your own record."
Okay.
And this was one of the first. This show you tell them my age. This was one of the first stereophonic records from RCA, which was RCA Victor at the time. And but it had orchestras. It had all types of music. Donald Washington, it had jazz.
So it was more of like a mix.
It was a sampler.
A sampler, okay.
And I got to play that, so I'm being exposed to all types of music, right there. And I still have it. I actually took the record.
Really?
It's mounted on my wall in
Really?
my inspiration room.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I have two copies. My older sister went and got me one because I played that one until it turned gray.
Yeah.
But I have it there just as a part of how I evolved in music. And from there, in the third grade, I'd asked my dad. My best friend had this silver clarinet, and he was in the band at school. So I went home and said, "Hey, Dad, I want a clarinet."
Clarinet too,
You know?
yeah.
And so he went and got it. You know, he didn't get a silver one, but he went
Got
and
a
got
clarinet.
it. So I started, you know, teaching myself, fumbling around with it. And I went to school, and they had once a week someone would come and direct an orchestra.
Was that part of the curriculum?
Curriculum of the school, yeah. So that was the closest to private lessons that I got. You know, I have I have 5 brothers and sisters, so everybody wasn't going to get private lessons and everything, whatever. So I went through that till I got to high school. And when I got to high school, I'm not going to tell that story, but the horn sort of disappeared.
Interesting.
And so there was, it disappeared in the coat room. And I'm walking home one day, and I got this case, and I said, "Why is my case so light?" And I opened it up, and there was one piece left in the
mouthpiece.
Yeah. And I said,
Wow.
So I closed it up, went home, told Dad, "Hey, Dad, I'm clarinet."
Yeah.
You know, I had made somebody mad. That's why I said I'm not going to tell that story. And so he said, "Well, I bought the first one. You want another one?
Yeah.
You're going to have to buy it yourself." And so I worked at Arby's Roast Beef for
Arby's.
for $1.10 an hour. And at the end of the summer, I had $400. And the saxophone because by then I decided, well, if I'm going to buy it,
I'm going to buy.
Saxophone players get solos. Girls
like the saxophone
guys
players.
with the saxophone. So I said, I'm going to buy a saxophone. So I went to the store and they said, "Well, yeah, you can have that. It's $425." And I said, "I only have $400." So I went home and said, "Well, Dad, I got $400, but I need $25." He said, "Well, I told you, you're going to buy the next one, so I'm going to loan you $25. But you're going to pay that
Pay
back."
me back, right?
And I paid him back. And but 2 weeks after I got that instrument, which is learning a new instrument.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a whole new body.
Yeah. One of my neighbors was in a band called the Esquires, and he knew of a band that was forming called The Delusion.
Interesting.
And John Freeman was the leader of the group. Now, John Freeman ended up being the writer for Just Don't Want to Be Lonely for Ronnie Dyson, and which the main ingredient turned into a million seller. But they were forming another band, and he said, "Why don't you go?" And I said, "I could audition. I could
just started playing.
I could get around the instrument,
Yeah.
you know." So I went, and I went, to the audition, and what it was, they were letting go a saxophone player, and they wanted because they wanted another one. So now he's there. So I come in and they start playing. Well, I developed my ear to the point I was taking stuff. That's how I learned how to play.
Okay.
Listening to the radio, fiddling around the instrument, and trying until I could find whatever they were doing. So they named some songs that I knew.
That you knew, and
I
you
played
took
them.
it well.
I said, "Okay, you're hired." And the other saxophone player said, "We're gonna have 2 saxophone players?" And they said, "No." And that's when I found out that they were getting ready to let him go. But anyway, I got in that band, and we played a lot of the dances and the proms, and got with the talent agency. And it's actually a garage band. We rehearsed in a garage in Northwest DC. And from there, when I in the senior year, which is where my band director started unknowingly my teaching career.
Really?
Yeah, but it wasn't the way that most people would think. By not reading that well, I had a tendency to distract when it came to my turn. I mean, I could hear, so I figured out what we were supposed to play, and I would play it. And that's how I got, and I would move up in chairs.
Similar like Drumline. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah. Well, when I saw Drumline, I said, "Wow, can I relate?" But one day I just acted up a little bit too much, and he said, "Come here." And he said, and he was sitting on a stool. I'll never forget it. He said, "One of these days, you're going to be sitting in my chair having to deal with people like you." Now, you would think that would, and it did.
Yes.
For the next few years, I was like, "Oh, no, I'm not going to teach. No way." So when I went to college, I got a scholarship because, matter of fact, he's still with us. Bobby Felder was the director of bands at Federal City College at that time, and he brought his big band to the school, and they played. And that's the first time I'd ever seen a live big band. I was like, "Wow!" And I got excited. So when I met him, he said, "Well, are you interested in majoring in music?" I said, "Oh yeah, definitely." He said, "Well, would you, be interested in a scholarship?" I didn't know. Look, scholarship, music, college, home to mom and dad. Look, y'all don't have to pay no money. I said, done deal. So I got in there, but I thought that I was just going to major in performance. And when I got my associate's degree, I said, okay, mom and daddy happy, I went to college. I'm on my way. And same one, Bobby Felder and a whole bunch of other people. They said, well, look, man, you're 2 years into this, you're on scholarship.
Right.
And what can you do with an associate's degree? That's the most important line that they got me with. What can you do with an associate's degree that you couldn't do with your high school diploma? And so I could see myself trying to argue that with my parents.
And how was that going to turn out?
And that wasn't going to turn out too well. So
what could you do differently?
He said, well, we have a bachelor's degree. And just you're halfway there. 2 more years. You're on scholarship. Keep maintain your grades and stuff. And, he said you can take a bachelor's degree and do a whole lot of things. You can do basket weaving if you wanted to. Whatever. You got a bachelor's degree. So they convinced me, and I said I would stay on. And then they said, well, there's only one thing. Because I said, can I major in performance? And they said, no. We don't have a performance bachelor's degree. We have an education bachelor's degree.
Interesting.
And boy, my whole body started shaking. So I said, no, I don't want to teach.
That moment from band.
Yeah, man. Ago. I said, oh no, it's going to come through. That curse is going to come through. And he said, but you don't have. He said, but you don't have to teach. Just get the bachelor's. Just get your bachelor's degree. So I went ahead and did it. And from there, I did my student. They was slick. They decided that they wanted me to do my student teaching at Duke Ellington School of the Arts.
Interesting.
Because they knew I wanted to be performing assistant, somebody dedicated to the arts. So they had pretty much set that up. But before I could student teach, I had to do a practicum.
Sure.
So they sent me to a junior high school in D.C. called Jefferson Junior High.
Okay.
Band director Winston Hall, never forget him because I ended up playing with him later. But he said, okay, you're going to take these flutes over in the corner for your practicum, and you're going to teach them for the supervisory. And I did, and I had about 4 flute players, and I'll teach one, and I'll turn around and teach one. You sit there and practice that, you practice that, you practice that. So one night I turned around this way and was telling another student, and I heard this wham! And I turned back around, and the kid's eyes were like this. And I said, what happened? I looked down, and the flute was almost wrapped around the chair.
Oh, wow.
He said, I don't know. and
Again, that moment.
Well, I was at that point I really didn't know what to do.
What to do, right?
And Winston said, "Look, man, we get another flute." He's frustrated. He's trying to get, So anyway, I talked to him a little bit, and gave him another flute and said, just work a little harder, to come. About 2 weeks later, he comes in with the biggest smile on his face you ever want to see. He said, Mr. Yarborough, let me see this. And he said he was playing what he wanted, but just the way he looked and how excited he was that he had done something.
Did you see something in him that you recognized in your own experience?
Yeah, of course. Because I knew how I felt about music, and I've always felt about music. I said, "Oh Lord, he's got the bug," And but just that light in his eye, and the fact that he was convinced now he could do something,
right?
And that basically sealed it. And everything else, I look at it as divine intervention, because I ended up at Duke Ellington. They hired me there, even though I got fired before I got a chance to start because they cut hours out of the city, teaching hours.
Wow. So
I lost that and ended up selling pianos in Columbia and Maryland, and then I came back and took a job. I took a job at Wilson High School teaching driver's ed, waiting for the band director to retire.
So you can step in there.
Yeah, but he wouldn't retire. So I ended up taking a job at Woodson Junior High, and they hadn't had a band in 3 years, and I had to get the instruments and put students together and start them from scratch. And I did that and invited, it was Dr. Florell McKenzie was the superintendent at that time, whose daughter I had taught how to drive. By the way. Anyway, she was coming to the school, and they said, well, can you have the kids play something for her? And, I did, and we got to having a pretty good relationship after that. She was happy with what the kids did and the fact that it was a band in the school now. On down the road.
So at this time, what is your goal? What are you looking
at
to?
At that time, I was a performer as far as I was concerned. I wanted to write. I did want to produce. I didn't know anything about producing, but I knew I wanted to put records out and stuff. I just wanted to be a
Were you
musician.
still playing in a band?
I was playing in a band all along. I had a group called the Sons of Nature, which is a popular group, and when I got to college, I got in a big band, because that took my heart, and so I continued to do that and playing. I was just playing around wherever I could, meeting mentors, which is a huge part of it.
Yeah, so I did want to ask about that. In this time in your life, who were some of your mentors? I know you mentioned Felder.
Yeah,
right,
Bobby
right.
Felder, Dr. Arthur Dawkins, and we'd go with Calvin Jones. And I mean, there's a story on all of these folks. Rick Henderson, who used to be with Duke Ellington Orchestra. Man, it's a huge list.
Yeah.
And that's another part that's driving me, because I don't want, a lot of them are really icons from DC, but they don't get the recognition that I've been blessed with.
Absolutely.
There are a lot who have. I mean, Sir Roland Hanna, Sonny Stitt. I mean,
Why do you think that is?
Those that stayed in the city, in the village, and raised the village, did it understanding that they would not be promoted worldwide. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have, you didn't have the means of self-production and things that we have now. And so, but they were happy, and they played. I mean, these guys played at the Howard Theater, and they played with different people and whatever. But their dedication to making sure that the next generation, and that is really what stuck with me.
Yeah.
Every musician that I was introduced to everybody when I was in college, but everyone that I met treated me like they knew me forever.
Really?
You know, and that they treated me like I was theirs. I mean, I would get called to guys' house. Keita Betts called me to his house. Everything that happened in my life, going to college, getting married, having a kid, getting a job at Duke Ellington, all of these, I ended up sitting at his kitchen table and him telling me about things that were going on. Of course, I played in his band for about 6 years, and but he wasn't the only one. All of the guys that I met and that I mentioned treated me like that. Even the band directors in junior high school.
Right.
Arthur Capehart, Roberta Flack was my homeroom teacher. And she talked me into going back and apologizing to the band director because he didn't teach like the other band director did, so I thought he didn't know anything about what he was doing. Yeah, there are all these things that really built me, though, because again, it was the community, the music community, that supported, me, my efforts, and my dreams. Because they could see in me what they saw in themselves. Absolutely,
and that's sorry to cut you off there. But that is a common thing we see with a lot of our guests here, is that they were able to recognize their passions and pursue those with vigor due to the community around them. And my question here is, do you think that sense of community is still present today, especially in the music industry?
In the music industry, the community is there. This is going on, that's why I'm so amazed at the recognition that I've had. But this is going on. It's always been the culture beyond the educational institution. Jazz in the institution is fairly young, and it has not been funded, thoroughly.
Pens falling off.
Oh, get out of here!
Don't want that to drop off.
People get mad if they don't see that, especially me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And
not being funded.
Yeah, not being funded, and the artistry understands that, and they're continuing. I mean, I have, and as I get up in age, I lose a lot of mentors, and believe me, it's a hole.
Right.
But I've been able to be in contact with all of my mentors whenever I wanted to.
Right.
Whenever something came up that I had not experienced, and I knew that they have. The door's open, the phone's always open to discussion and helping me get to the next. And that sense is going on in the communities, in the jazz communities, and it has to, because
absolutely
the city administration doesn't put it as high on the rung of importance.
Right.
And I can't argue with that, but still it is to the music community and the arts community and the culture community of grave importance to maintain and move forward.
Or you think the children of today are taking advantage of the resources they have?
Some, it's always the same.
Right.
Some do and some don't. But I've been able to see my own students pick up the mantle. The DC Jazz Lobby is actually founded by Herbert Scott, who was a former student who I met at a music store before he auditioned for Ellington. He was in there trying to pick out music, and he saw a poster of me in the store, and he saw me in the store, and he came over and says, "That's you." And So we talked, asked him what he was doing, and he said, well, I was picking out some music for, to audition, and he was picking out a jazz piece. And I said, hold, time out. We learning music here. I said, you're going to be able to play jazz, but I think that you should get started in all types of music. So I'm going to ask you to get a classical piece to something that I can see that you've worked on and whatever. And he did. He ended up coming to Ellington, graduating, getting a scholarship to Michigan State, where he ended up studying with Rodney Whitaker, who was with Wynton Marsalis' band. And he came back here. He's a native Washingtonian, just like myself.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm going to live here, and I'm going to see what I can do to forward the efforts of artists in Washington, D.C. So he goes on Capitol Hill, and he's got his own organization now. And but he's still playing. He's coming to, I think he's playing Blues Alley soon.
Oh, wow.
But he's a wonderful player and a wonderful heart. And but it does my heart great that he saw what I was doing, because he came through the Institute and has gone on to do some of his own. Also, my assistant director and his wife, who were students of mine at Ellington, went to the new school, got their bachelor's together, came back to Howard, got their master's. As soon as they got their bachelor's, they came back and said, okay, we hear you're starting the Institute, we're going to help. And they volunteered, and they've been with me, ever since. And I got stories.
Yeah,
I got stories.
And stories, some stories that we may want to hear. We've talked a lot about your education career, right? But you are a phenomenal player and musician as well. So who are some of the people you played with that bring back those great memories?
That I played with. Well, and again, I'm into saying unsung as well, because before I could get to play with the other luminaries, I had to be introduced to them. It was my community, and Keita Betts was in my community. Bill Harris, who owned the Pigfoot, was in my community, as well as the Arthur K. Parts and the Dr. Dawkins and
Sonny Stitt.
Well, Sonny Stitt was living in New York when I met him. How I met him and fell in love with his music. Well, you couldn't help but fall in love with his music once you heard him. I went to see him at McKinley High School when I was a teenager, and he played. I couldn't hear a mistake.
Right.
And all the records that I had of his, I couldn't hear him. He didn't make mistakes. And so when I first met him,
it felt right.
Everything was great.
Yeah.
And so I got a chance to meet him. I went backstage and I met him, and I said, "Hey, Mr. Stead, how you doing? My name is Davey Yarborough. I play saxophone too." He said, "You do?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, who invented the saxophone?"
No.
"How long you been playing?" "I've been playing about 5 years now, He said, "Well, who invented the saxophone?" He said, "Well, how many keys on the saxophone?" He said, "Well, where did the saxophone originate?" And he just started asking me all these questions. And I couldn't answer any.
Not one.
And every time he asked a question, I got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. He said, "Don't you ever tell anybody that you play." He said, "I don't play. I study the saxophone. If I'm studying the saxophone, what does that make you do?" Brought my focus into a totally different.
How old were you at this time?
I was a teenager. I guess I was about 17, 18.
And this was recent upon that transition from the stolen clarinet.
By this time I was playing the saxophone.
Okay.
So from that, of course, I started studying him a little bit more, listening a lot more, because I always loved his music, but I started getting more records and things like that. And while I was in college, as I was getting ready, working on my bachelor's, I ran into his wife, and he had moved to the D.C. area.
Wow. Okay.
And I had gotten a grant from the National Endowment to study with anybody I wanted to study with, as long as they write a letter saying that they would, they would teach me, they would fund it. So, of course, it was Sonny Stitt. I said, "Well, you think he would, teach me?" He said, "She said, well, he's on the road all the time. He was still in New York, getting ready to move down." He said, "But I'll tell you what, here's his phone number. Call him."
Immediately.
And I called him, and I asked him, and he said, "Oh, sure, I'd be happy to." He said, "Send me the format for the letter, and I'll send it out." And he said, "And what I'll do, you come on Saturday morning. I'm coming in from wherever he was coming in. See me come by my house at 1:15 on Saturday." And I went, of course. And a lesson was supposed to be an hour. It ended up being something like 3 hours. His daughter, Katia Stitt, who is now at WPFW radio personality, was a teenager. I mean, not even a teenager. She was younger than a teenager.
Yeah.
And she would come in from school, and I'd be taking up her father's time. But we got to be, we're good friends, definitely good friends now. But he would finish the lesson, and he'd say, well, let's go upstairs and get some ice cream. And he liked Western wear, and I liked Western wear. He comes downstairs one day with 2 Stetson hats with feathers and everything. He said, you see these fit? I mean, he really, this is what I'm saying about how musicians were.
Yeah.
And he didn't care about the time or whatever. He get a little, I'm sure that wasn't a big deal to him anyway. But having this type of experience has to transfer, and I guess from Dr. Dawkins, I'll never forget it, when I got my bachelor's degree, he had got me all the way through associates and everything. He was my actual woodwind teacher. And I actually majored in flute, and was somewhat because of him. They didn't have a saxophone major. It wasn't a legitimate orchestral instrument. I'm not going to say what they called it, but he asked me what I wanted to do, and I knew he recorded.
Okay.
I knew that he was a fantastic player, and he worked theater. So he said, and I told him, I'm going to do what you do. So he takes me to the theater, makes me put on a black outfit, and went down to Ford's Theater, and he was doing a musical. And he said, we're going down the pit, you're going to see how I work. And he had about 8 instruments.
Is this your first pit experience?
My first pit experience. He had about 8 instruments. I mean, oboes, all kinds of stuff. And while the play was going on, he'd pick up instrument, play, pick up another instrument, play, pick up another instrument, play. And I'm like, whoa. See, yeah, did I say I wanted to do this? And
you remember what play it was?
I can't remember what. I think it was called Nonsense.
Nonsense.
Yeah, it was about nuns. I can't. Yeah. None. That was it. It was called Nonsense. And about a year later, he had recorded an album with my current wife, who I didn't know at that time, and she was going on. She was doing some performances that he couldn't perform. So he said, "Okay, I'm gonna send you out, and send you out on a couple of jobs." And I'm like, whew, man,
feeling good.
I made it now.
Yeah.
So I get to the job, and I see this beautiful lady, and I'm looking at the music. And I said, no, I'm focused on the music. I'm going to keep this gig. Right. And so I did. We did the gig, and rehearsed and had the gig New Year's Eve, 1977.
Is this also your first recording experience?
No. I started recording in high school.
Okay.
With John Freeman, as a matter of fact. We worked with a group called the Levations. We had a group called the Sons of Nature. We had a group of Delusion. All of those
groups were recording at the same time. Okay.
But being sent out to do this type of recording, studio work.
Studio, right.
He said, you get there, they give you the music, you do it. In this particular time, went to rehearsal, and we had the performance at the Iranian embassy in Washington, D.C. It was on Mass Avenue, no longer there. But anyway, I did the concert, and we ended up walking out together. And she turned around and said, I like the way you play. And I said, I like the way you sing. And she said, well, I like to get your number in case, I need another.
And I'd like your number in case, too.
I'm like, shit. I'm not even going to say that. I was shocked anyway. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, she called me for another job. And I did that job with her. And I guess a couple more weeks later, she called and said, well, I'm working a nightclub. And they were working like 5-6 nights a week. Yeah. And she said they're getting ready to let the saxophone player go. Or no, they let the saxophone player go. And the leader of the group said, do you know any saxophone players? And she said, yeah, I just work with. And so I ended up working with her throughout, I guess, quite a few months. Okay. And we got to be good friends, just friends, because you don't date the musicians. Right. That's what we were all told. You don't date band members because that could. So we didn't, And I got a call to start my own trio on the other side of town in Southeast, a club called Manny's. It's an organ trio, and so I told her, give my 2 weeks notice. I'm like heading my own group, and she said, she said, well, I'd like to stay in contact, and I said, I really would too. I just didn't know, how to say it. Right. And so at that point, we agreed to go on a date. And I went out and did my little trio job. And when I get off from the trio job, I would come back, and I was riding a motorcycle. So I would drive the motorcycle over, pick her up when she got done, because she got done an hour later than I did.
Perfect timing.
And so we hung out and got to know each other. A couple of months later, I decided to move back to the club, and we did that. And nobody knew. Nobody in school knew. The club owners didn't know.
Very
that we were
professional.
doing that, trying to be. Until one night, one of the saxophone players who used to play in the club a lot was a cab driver. So early one morning when we finished riding, we were at a donut shop that he liked to stop in. He walks into the door and he says,
2 and 2.
"Oh," and of course the cat was out the bag for the club. And that was the year that I was graduating from college. And so after I did my senior recital, I told my faculty members, I'm going to get married this summer. And that started another. That's a whole nother story. Bottom line is, they wanted to make sure that's what I needed to do, because getting married might slow me down, and might send me in another direction. And they knew how much I wanted to be a musician, and of course, I'm sure they wanted me to be a musician. And so they were trying to talk me out of it, and they didn't. So we ended up getting married that summer, and she was touring, and but there was no way. And by that time, we had gotten to be such good friends that I was sure. And
so music brought you the most important thing.
Yeah, but see, at that point, I mean, my whole life from the music has just gone that way. Right from that, we've raised our daughter. She's 33 now, and she's grown, and she
doing quite well herself.
Yeah, she does music as well. But she's actually an English specialist and a special ed director, and but she writes songs and plays some guitar and some piano. So, but music, as I tell a lot of my students, I said music has taken me everywhere. I mean, I've been, I've traveled. I've taken kids to travel, but I've traveled on my own.
So, give us some of your playing highlights.
Playing highlights, I've had. I mean, all of it. Anytime we get a chance to play, and that's really how I feel.
But there's those times where you're still holding.
Well, I do remember one. The first. Well, wasn't the first, because it was actually the second. But I got a call. One of my former students was working with Wynton Marsalis.
Okay.
And Wynton had to. He was doing a recording at National Public Radio, and one of the saxophone players couldn't come up. And Wynton was saying, "You know anybody in D.C.?" And my student said, "Yeah. Davey Yarborough's there." So I get this phone call saying, "Can you bring your alto down to National Public Radio? And we got a couple days. We're going to be down here. We're recording Duke Ellington's Harlem Suite, and bring your clarinet and whatever." So I went down and played, and it was recorded and released, and the experience was super. I ended up doing commercials for All Things Considered.
Really?
Did a lot of boom, 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 boom. A lot of those were done by the Marsalis ensembles. And
right.
I had a chance to get in, to do that. So that's one. I remember I can't remember what I was playing the Millennium Stage, and my parents came.
That's got to be special.
Oh, that was special because they weren't sure that they wanted me to be a musician, but after that they were sure.
After that day,
and so that's one, and I've had a few too.
Yeah, and all things considered, I do want to mention this briefly too. The Cosby Show, the intro music to that.
I can tell you a story, and they're getting ready to I think show a clip, but I'll tell you how that evolved.
Okay, before we get back to that, we'll get back to the Cosby story, but we're going to have a clip from the Kennedy Center, so we're going to show our audience here a bit of your talents, just a little bit. Let's check it out. music that makes you move. And before you get into the Cosby story, I do want to ask briefly, because I didn't have the chance to ask this before, why jazz as opposed to another genre? Or I know you mentioned when you were teaching with your pupil, you have to learn a classical set. I want to see to make sure that you're, staying focused and you can read and things. Why jazz for you in particular?
And I think that decision came more in college. But I believe that the first spark was seeing that big band, that entertainment package that Bobby Felder brought to the school.
Right.
And seeing the arrangements and hearing the arrangements and how fiery they were. And then when I got to Federal City, I auditioned for the band. I didn't make it the first semester, but that's another story. But I eventually got in the band, got the lead chair, and stayed with that. And by that time, the jazz artistry had reached out. Now, my degrees are not in jazz. And, and so I was, like I said, a flute major in undergrad, and then grad school at Howard, I was I focused on clarinet, flute, and saxophone.
Okay.
But still the classical repertoire mainly. I just played in the bands and learned the music as well. But I believe that training, that formal training, that came through classical music. Was the greatest way to go.
Absolutely.
So when I got the job at Ellington, in Ellington, by the way, they had jazz after school. When I got there, Mickey Bash used to come down from New York and teach the students after school, those that were interested. And when I did my student teaching there, that's how I found out about it. But when I came back after being hired and fired, I went back as a counselor. And one day, the superintendent, Floretta McKenzie, came into the school and with a principal who was the principal of McKinley High School that used to have a music major. And she knew what I was doing. She knew what I did, and she couldn't understand why would you be at Ellington counseling. But I have the principal here who would love for you to come and revive the music program at McKinley. But the principal of Ellington was there at the same time, and he had recently seen me do a concert with Joe Williams at Fort DuPont Park, and he had given Joe an award. Looked down and said, "What are you doing here?" And so he said, "Well, if you're going to go back into music, I'd like for you to come here." And I looked at the superintendent, I looked at my current boss, and she saw in my eyes what was going on. She said, "Look, I don't care where you go, as long as you go back in the music." And then the principal at Ellington said, "Well, I don't have another teaching slot." And she said, "Well, you do now."
You have a director slot.
Yeah. They said now, and that's how the job was created as a part of the curriculum in Ellington. And that was 1986. And I was there, and I'm still there part-time now, but I actually retired from DCPS.
Congratulations.
Thanks. In June, after 40 years. Yeah. So.
But do you think that formal education that you did have prepared you to perform theme music for shows like?
Yes, it did. It did. It actually, I got the formal training that I need, that I really wish I had in elementary school. And because the environment of the music department at the Federal City College was turned to UDC, because I got my associates at Federal City College, my bachelor's at UDC. But the environment there was so nurturing, and they had everything. So and they understood. I mean, we had the same Dr. Dawkins would be playing at with the National Symphony at the Kennedy Center here, or he was a contractor at Arena Stage. So he was doing all types of, and the music that I saw, nonsense. That wasn't it wasn't jazz. So he helped me to understand that you want to be a musician.
Right, a musician.
And then from that point, you can choose, what areas. And jazz called me because so many of the jazz icons, and then I began to see the history and the fact that it was America's contribution to musical arts. And again, with just so much appreciated guidance. And I love it. Of course, I love the form, but I love music, period.
Absolutely. And how did you get that opportunity for the theme music? Yeah.
I was playing with a group. Cleve Francis was a heart surgeon in Mount Vernon, and he had gotten a contract with a record label to record country music. He was a country music performer, singer, vocalist, and his music director was Arthur Lisi, who was one of the writers on the Cosby Show. And the Cosby Show hadn't started at that time, but we were doing jobs at different places and whatever. And one day he says, "Look, man, I got this recording project that I want to do, and it's for." He wouldn't even tell me what it was. He said, "But if it's accepted, it'll turn into some more work." So we recorded, and that was, I believe, that was a Thursday night, and or Saturday. It was Saturday, and when we finished the recording session, he said, "Well, I'll be back in contact with you, let you know what's going on." So Monday he calls. He says, "Okay, on Thursday, I want you to turn on the television. I think it was 6 o'clock," and so I did. Boom! It was the Cosby Show, and it was.
What was that feeling like?
Oh, now that was one of those. It was definitely one. Oh wow! I got to do that.
Yeah, you have to do that.
And of course that was the experience. And I said, okay, cool. I did the Cosby Show, and then they said, well, we're going to be doing these shows regularly. So he said they liked it.
The theme music.
So we would do the background. Between the scenes, and
really?
There was actually a Bill Cosby orchestra, and so they had a cadre of musicians. But I just happened to not only be able to do that in some of the other Little Bill and some of the other shows, but being at Ellington, Stu Gardner, who was one of the other writers, was the other writer for the Cosby Show, was on the board at Ellington for a while, and he came on while I was there, and he left while I was there. Well, he called me a couple of days and said, well, look, we're going to do a couple of more shows. We're going to introduce Little Bill and some of the other shows. Would you like to bring some of your students to do the sessions?
Wow.
So I got a couple of my students, and they got it. So they got it. Not only did I get the opportunity, but I was able to provide the opportunity for another generation of students coming up.
And that's something I'm hearing that is consistent through all the stories you've been sharing today. Just that feeling to give back, that notion to give back, and that follow through, and that has come full circle. I'm just going to read off a couple of things here. Numerous education awards, including a semi-finalist in the Grammys for Music Educator of the Year. That was this past year, correct? And
it's the second one.
That's the second one. Jazz Instructor of the Year from the Berklee Conservatory, the Kennedy Center's Stephen Sondheim, Inspirational Teacher Award, Jazz Educators Network has recognized you, Downbeat Magazine Hall of Fame, and they just published this wonderful article, DC Hall of Fame. So all these things are coming back full circle. How are you recognizing these things as they're coming, or how have they changed you?
Changed me? No, they confirmed two statements that the same person gave me, and that was Dr. Arthur Dawkins. One was when I got to school, he says, "Look, you be good to music, and music will be good to you." And I was when I got ready to graduate, when I was getting my bachelor's degree. He came down, I shook his hand, and I said, how will I ever be able to repay you for all you've done for me? You exposed me to the business. Even I ended up, you introduced me to my wife. I mean, it's just, I mean, he was really like a father figure too.
Right, absolutely.
And he said, you don't owe me anything. He said, except to pass it on to the next generation. And that's where I really crystallized the idea on giving it back, and having that opportunity to teach at Ellington put me in a situation where kids that I knew wanted to be artists, were, because they would put up with extra hours and all kinds of things like that. And I said, well, this is the ultimate place to to do this. And then I decided that as a Washingtonian, why Ellington could only house 500 kids,
right?
And a whole lot more kids in DC,
and a
whole lot more kids that were like me that didn't have the private lessons when they came in. And so the idea of the Washington Jazz Arts Institute,
that was going to be my next question.
That's how it evolved, and
remaining and continuing to work with your wife.
To work with my wife. As a matter of fact, if without her support, I couldn't have done it. There's no way, because she's my co-founder,
Absolutely. God bless her.
of the institute, and she went along with my dream, and is still going along, with the dream. But it allowed me to reach further out into the city, into the DMV, to young people, and we teach those kids for free.
What's some of the things that the institute does?
Well,
For those that may not know.
well, we have Saturday programs, and Saturday morning programs where we're teaching improvisation and jazz theory and instrumental and vocal music. And then during the summer, and that goes from October to March. And then during the summer, we have an intensive, 4-week intensive, 4 days a week, 6 hours a day, where we build ensembles, big bands and combos, teach, again, improvisation theory, mentoring. And that's where I have, like I said, some of my graduates who come back. And also some of the icon in D.C., Wes Biles, one of the greatest bass players you ever want to hear.
Absolutely.
But he teaches, and then some of the other students, and like I said, I'm watching the students grow into their own. Amy Bormit is one of our graduates, and she actually founded Washington Women in Jazz, and their festival, and that's, which will be coming up next month as well. But I'm continuing the legacy of those that instilled into me,
Right.
and mine are extending my legacy in what they do, and hopefully that's what Dr. Dawkins was talking about. Passing on
And
to
what feeling does that give you?
that feeling is better than any paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely.
To walk into, my daughter took me to France a couple of years ago, and we went to the Marciac Jazz Festival, and out on walks on the stage is Roy Hargrove and his group, and two of my former students.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, ooh. And I've seen, Benny Golson would come back to town.
That's
and
gotta
one
just
of
give
these-
you chills
Oh, man,
every
let me
time.
tell you, it's affirmation of things being done right. And having a part of that. To me, there's no better feeling than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us a bit about the Bohemian Cavern.
For a long time, this was the first time that it was up for sale. I think it was going for something like $250,000.
Well, for those who may not be familiar.
Well, first of all, the Bohemian Caverns is a Washington, D.C. Landmark for jazz. If those who know, Ramsey Lewis recorded the In Crowd there. Every jazz artist who was a jazz artist had played in that club, and it's just a historic site that the club itself has not been designated that. So I did an internship at the Woodrow Wilson Museum on African American life during the Woodrow Wilson era, and it just so happened to coincide with another project called U Street, which I wanted to trace the evolution of jazz through Washington, and I was going to start with James Reese Europe. And so when I was asked to do this residency, I asked if I could use that as a part of my project, and they allowed me to do so. I did. It turned out pretty well, and the executive director called a post meeting, and at the post meeting we talked about what we did and what we accomplished, and they just happened to ask me, well, what are some of the other things that you would like to do? And I said, well, seeing that you asked, I would like to see the Bohemian Caverns designated a historic landmark, and I would like to, because I always wanted to do oral histories, but I really didn't have time and didn't know how.
Right.
And I found out I didn't know how because I went to a workshop through the Humanities Council.
Yeah, those are
and
tough.
when they showed me what I had to do, I said, okay, well, I guess I don't have the time, and definitely not the experience. Well, working in the museum, I got a chance to work with people who did know
And
how
have
to do
the
that.
expertise.
And so I said I would love to see a museum for Washingtonian musicians, because a lot of our young people and a lot of the residents of Washington, D.C. don't know the contributions of jazz,
right.
of so many artists.
Especially here, rooted in the city.
Right. So I'd like to have, a museum put into the same building, and I also would like to put one of the locations of the Washington Jazz Arts Institute in the building as well, which would allow future, past, and present exposure to the jazz arts and the jazz artistry in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
And so the museum, when I said that, the executive director, Susan Burning, said, well, would you mind if I said that to a couple of people, and
Who's a couple people?
I didn't. I just said, I said it's a dream for me. Anything that's going to help make it happen,
Right.
and that's the way I felt. Well, I mean, literally, a couple days later, I got a phone call from the Washington Business Journal saying, "We hear you want to resurrect the Bohemian Caverns," and
So Washington Business Journal's a
Yeah.
couple people.
yeah, you're right. I said that's a couple of people. And by the way, one of the other panelists, Garrett Peck,
Okay.
actually went home and blogged my statements, and so we went to
A
quite
few
a few people.
Yeah, a few people.
And so they said, well, we would love to do an article about, your dream and hopefully spark interest in what you're doing. And they did, and the DCist also put an article out, and the phone rang, the emails came, and they're still coming, and there are a lot of folks who are interested. And I'm praying that this stays until we can get that would be the ultimate dream for me, to actually see that come to fruition.
That to come to fruition. That is, that's an amazing goal there.
And it's through the Washington. It would be. It actually is part of the mission of the Washington Jazz Arts Institute, which is to allow any kid that, once they knew that they wanted to be an artist, would have a support system from the time that they started until they came back as a senior citizen to give back.
And that's just that full, like you mentioned at the top
circle.
of it, does a full circle, and you're good to music, and music is good to you. And so, what are some of I'm going to ask you to be a bit selfish here. Some of your accomplishments that you're proud of. I know the main thing is giving back and having that opportunity to see your former students shine in the ways that you know that they can, and now that they recognize it. But looking back on your experience, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
I'm really proud of my upbringing because I was taught and encouraged to dream and to believe that anything is possible. And I've had the opportunity not only to perform with giants and icons, but to experience producing. Esther and I have been performing for over 40 years, and we've put out several CDs, and just being able to research when challenged with a task. I remember getting a phone call. Someone was looking for a person to score a movie.
Okay.
And I had the phone there. I said, well, what does it entail to myself?
Right.
And I said, well, so I said that to the person. I said, well, we have the film already done. We want you to come and look at it and see if you can write, write music to support the themes. And I said, well, nothing beats a fail but a try. And I went over, and they had a piano in the place, and I saw some of the film, and I went over to the piano and played something that came to mind. And the guy said, you're hired. And then, of course, I had to figure out how to go and, get the rest of the score down. Get the score written out and get the musicians. But the experience I would not have had if I hadn't had that energy to say, well, try it. The worst that could happen is you could, not do it. But if you don't, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Absolutely.
So I'm happy that that's the way that I've been brought up. And even when there were times when I doubted, I was trying to figure, what do you mean you're going to make me the jazz studies director at Duke Ellington School of the Arts when there are a bunch of band directors out here who are much older than I, much more experienced than I, to do this. But having that circle that says, don't worry about that. Somebody asks you to do it. Either you do it or you don't. You say yes or no.
Right.
And I said, I get the opportunity, and I got all this information on Duke Ellington through Keita Betts. I mean, he gave me books and everybody else that knew.
Yeah.
So here it is. I get a chance, to study, and I get a chance to change history because it became a staple at the school, and which still goes on. It has its own legacy now, and in the product that it's done. So, I guess, and that's what.
Full circle.
Yeah. That's the personal
more intrinsic,
part.
More
I
intrinsic
mean,
stuff.
being able to play, having the opportunity to play, having been born a creative a person. All of that I didn't do. As a matter of fact, 90% of this I can tell you I didn't do. It just it presented itself, and I really believe in divine intervention, but it's also given me the energy to give to the next generation and say, look, do it.
Right.
If you feel it, go for it.
And I think that lastly, as we wrap up here, as I prepare for our conversation today, I heard you say something in an interview about a vision to a great education. And I would love for you to speak more to that, and as a student of music, why it's important, what's important to learn early and stay consistent with.
Actually, read, research, communicate, ask, all of the things that allow you to grow intellectually,
right,
and emotionally, and don't accept no.
Don't accept no.
You're going to hear no. I tell students as they're writing their applications for college, and I tell them in 11th grade, I said, well, look, write at least 10. You're only going to go to one, but you have 10 chances to get that. And just because one comes back negative
doesn't mean
it's over.
Right.
Yeah. And I've learned that from experience.
For sure.
I applied for a lot of things, and some things I got, and some things I didn't. I used the statement that was made to me. Babe Ruth had the world's record for hitting home runs, but he also held the record for striking out.
That's true. That's one of my favorite stats.
Yeah.
And so where can folks get involved with the Washington Jazz Arts Institute, or get involved with some of the things that you're doing in the community?
Well, we have a website, which is wjai.org, and you can go, and it shows you some of the things we do, and it re-explains the mission. And our email is arts@wjai.org.
arts@wjai.org. And is there any way people can get involved with the Bohemian Cavern, or?
I'm trying to gear as we make progress with it. And we're in the planning stages. We've applied for a planning grant, and we've contacted quite a few people.
Wonderful.
I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
And
it's not hard to find.
Yeah, not hard to find. But if my objective is to keep, as we move forward, keep it on the web. I'll be doing some other interviews, and trying my best to market the best way I can.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been an incredible conversation.
I've
learned a lot. I hope you all have too. You can join us next week for our next episode of Booking Now at 5:30 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. As I tell you every week, if no one has told you that they love you today, remember that I do and always will. Good night.